Hi everyone, my name is Miles. You're tuning in at X-Rays, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting one of the most influential aesthetic medical practitioners in the world, an award-winning author who's redefined the boundaries of medical science and artistry. He's among the few doctors who have won the coveted AMIC trophy 3 times for varied research relating to the use of stem cells and platelets in treating cancer, cachexia, and reversing skin necrosis. And he's not just about procedures, he's about people, well being, and pushing the boundaries of science to blend art and medicine. But his impact isn't limited to his clinic walls. He's trained over 10,000 practitioners, championed patient safety standards, and traveled the world as a sought after speaker. I'd like you all to meet the medical director of Ailesbury Clinics, which consistently ranks among the top aesthetic centers in Ireland and beyond, Professor and Dr. Patrick Treacy. Hello, Dr. Patrick. Welcome to the X-Rays community.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm just back from my auntie died today, so I'm just back from the funeral. But otherwise, we're good to go.
Great. Thank you so much. It's fantastic to have you with us here today, Dr. Patrick. And I'm really excited to chat with you about everything from your lifelong passion that drew you into aesthetic medicine to the latest innovations you've pioneered and what it means to balance a global career with your thriving clinic. So you've crafted a remarkable career that spans decades. What initially brought you to aesthetic medicine and how did this passion evolve over time?
The interesting thing is, Miles, that when I came into this, aesthetic medicine didn't exist. I suppose wanted to do plastic surgery originally, but as you know, a war happened in Northern Ireland that I happened to get caught up in the middle of. So I had to sort of transfer my universities. So when I did my medicine originally, I was in Australia when 3 things happened, really. One was Botox started to become popular just among normal people. The second thing was the discovery of hyaluronic acid as a dermal filler in Sweden in 1996. The third thing was a good friend of mine, Shimon Eckhaus, invented the IPL laser. And he had run the FDA trials with Patrick Bitter, a friend of mine as well, in California. So I seen an opportunity maybe of merging the 3 things together. So we were certainly among the first aesthetic clinic medicines in the world back in 1998. And a lot of people think that a lot of this came from the United States. It didn't really. A lot of it came from Dublin, believe it or not, and maybe London as well, because America didn't use hyaluronic acid as a filler until 2005, 2006. So a lot of the Americans were coming to Dublin. And of course, then we had a head start how to solve the problems of reversing dermal filler complications, which is one of the reasons that Michael Jackson came to Dublin to get treated by us, because when Arnie Klein had put some filler into his face before he met the Queen, he wanted it back out. He didn't like it. He thought it made him look like a chipmunk. So he had to come to Dublin to sort of for treatment. And we discussed it with Arnie. There was nothing done behind his back. Also, I said, Botox started being used in America and Ireland about the same time, but an awful lot of the original innovations, particularly the use of hyaluronics, occurred in Dublin. And particularly when vascular occlusion happened, where dermal filler ended up going into an artery and causing necrosis of somebody's face, we had worked out those protocols over 20 years ago now that are accepted worldwide now.
I see, Dr. Patrick. Well, thank you for that quick rundown on the history of the technologies that you're using. It's just remarkable how that synergy of aesthetics, science, and artistry has fueled your career. And as someone who's witnessed huge changes in the field, what do you consider the most significant innovation, and how has it shaped your approach to patient care?
Well, I suppose those 3 things were the big innovations originally, because that separated cosmetic surgery from aesthetic medicine. And for the first time, things were simpler, things were cheaper, things could be done at lunchtime. You didn't need an overnight stay, you didn't need a general anesthetic. So really, the big innovation, of course, was to separate aesthetic medicine as a field of from cosmetic surgery. So we would have been pioneering in that. And then, of course, there was a lot of later things like the use of devices. We went through all the different energy spectrums from radio frequency all the way through those to the laser visible spectrum and beyond, up to CO2, erbiumyag. And then later, the new challenges of bioregenerative medicine with polynucleotides, exosomes, secretomes. I think they're a bit overrated as yet compared to the technologies that we did have. They may get them better in the future to use the process of manipulating either DNA, genetic coding to upregulate so that we can either make new collagen or even live longer by sort of affecting telomeres. But we're still on the cutting edge of that, and younger doctors are all switching over to it. But I would get a lot of patients coming into me saying the results are not as good as we used to have. And I think that's fair to say.
Well, very interesting. This innovation seemed to have made aesthetic treatments more accessible and tailored to modern day demands for quick and more natural results. Now, Dr. Patrick, let's talk about Ailesbury Clinics, which has been celebrated as the best in Ireland a couple of times. What do you think sets your practice apart, and how do you ensure such consistently high standards?
Yeah, so we've won Best Clinic in Ireland 5 out of the last 7 years. And don't forget, we were closed for 2 years with COVID. And our doctors, or myself, have won Best Doctor in Britain and Ireland 3 out of the last 6 years. So I tend to employ only doctors that have higher qualifications in dermatology. And I think that sets us apart, because a lot of the young doctors come out with a basic medical degree and go into this without having any specialty behind them. The second thing is that we tend to maintain safety profiles within patients. We have our own protocols regarding that. We tend to get the best equipment on the higher end of it, particularly a lot of the BTL. We have 6 or 7 different of their devices. And of the lasers, we would use also ones that I prefer, like Luminous Cutera. And all our doctors continually have to recertify, or they have to attend conferences around the world for higher training. We also have a type of training school within our clinic, but only for specialized subjects and specialized doctors. So I think if we maintain that high standards by not necessarily being competitive with other clinics, but more that we set certain standards that doctors have to reach before they can work for us. And then a lot of the other staff would be continually trained to a high standard. We employed the first medical estheticians, and everybody was saying to us, "You're taking on beauticians." I said, "No, we're not. Actually, we're going to change the bar here, and we will have what you would call beauticians doing vascular lasers, doing PL, and then the nurses do the more complex vascular lasers like Port Weinstein's, and the doctors will do ablative lasers like CO2. So we created not only new standards, but new hierarchies within aesthetic medicine, which was easier to do because of the fact there's new speciality. And we sure that the medical estheticians couldn't inject, they could dermal roll and use the little wound holes within the skin to get drugs across into the dermis. So you could dermal roll things in, nurses could inject, and doctors then obviously could do CO2 ablation and use the compounds getting in that way. And we were probably way ahead again in terms of innovation, because in 2012, we were using red light PRP and stem cells. And most of the processes that we used for that, either by dermal roller with the estheticians, and particularly for hair growth. I mean, we were doing PRP in hair in 2007. We won an award for it. The first papers came out.
I saw that.
Yeah, and then also in terms of using anti-inflammatory markers, growth factors, or any of the cytokines or signal messengers from things like Callus Professional Serum, which was the original exosomes and did contain exosomes, we were doing that 13 years ago. And now a lot of those processes are being used around the world with things like exosomes. But we were certainly not only claiming to be there first, but won awards for it, which tends to solidify it and sort of say, yeah, well, they actually did do it. One of my weaknesses is I don't tend to write a lot of papers on things. If people want to see my process, I'm quite open about them. They're in all the books I've written, or I give them openly at conferences around the world. That's probably why I get invited around the world, and we get a lot of people coming into my lectures, because I'm quite open to share information. I found particularly, I shouldn't say this about my colleagues, but an awful lot of people want to publish, say, we did that first. But I mean, no, you listened to us and then you did it because you copied us. And that has
Makes
happened
sense.
so often, particularly in
Right.
things like using methotrexate for reducing the nodules from dermal fillers. Through to many things.
Yeah, right.
We were
Well,
doing things like lip flips and back 20 years ago, and now they've become
mhm.
popular. Trapezius spasm. A lot of the Chinese girls in Dublin would come in, and that became popular only after the Barbie films. And a lot of these people think, "Oh, we're doing this for the first time." Well, not really. We were
We've got
doing that a long time
that.
ago.
Well, clearly there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than just cutting edge treatments. Innovation indeed not only changes methods, but it also reshapes people's expectations about aesthetics in general. And I learned also that you've done groundbreaking work with stem cells and PRP in skin rejuvenation. Could you give us a glimpse into how these innovations work, Dr. Patrick, and the transformative impact they're making?
In my first college, I had the benefit of doing molecular biology and science.
Okay.
So, as a consequence, I probably think different than other doctors because I'm sort of a scientist and a doctor. And when I was 15, I won the British Amateur Young Scientist. And then when I was around the same time in the south of Ireland, I won the Aer Lingus Biochemist of the Year. So I've always taught laterally in my life. So as a consequence, I think many people just do what they're told to do. Whereas I prefer to stand back and say, well, what exactly am I doing and why am I doing it? And if you consider what are we trying to do, we're either trying to stay younger, not get older, create new collagen, reverse the effects of anti-aging, whatever. So if you fall off a bike and cut your hand regenerates itself. And you got to think in that way. So if I've got somebody with old skin, how do I get new skin? Well, I can't keep throwing them off a bike, but maybe I can wound them in some other way with the blade of laser or with microneedling radiofrequency or whatever. And
Uh-huh.
then you say, okay, so I have wounded them, and as a consequence, they're forming new collagen, but how can I make that better? So you would say, if you can't bring Muhammad to the mountain, then bring the mountain to Muhammad. So what is happening in your hand? You've got growth factors, cytokinins, that are sort of helping to restore new collagen tissue and repair. So what you do is you either take that out of the blood or take stem cells from adipose tissue, or we're lucky enough at Callus and we can get commercial synthetic type variety that come from mammalian source in New Zealand from red deer. And if we're able to do that, then we can actually bypass the epidermis to get into the dermis to form new collagen. So how do you do that? Well, that's why we'd say if you're using a laser, is shooting holes down into the dermis to create new
Mhm.
collagen. So we can use that 15 minutes that the holes are still patent, that they haven't
Mhm.
closed open, and put the product on topically, be it PRP, whatever growth factors from PRP, and that will accelerate healing. So we did that, as I say, quite a long time ago. So as a consequence, we always, suppose, got better results than some of the other clinics. So people
Mhm.
would come to us by word of mouth. But I mean, we were quite open in what we were doing. And
Uh-huh.
we put some of these things up for competition or awards that we tended to win over the years. So it's the thought process that creates it rather than the procedure itself.
Well, you're such an achiever, Dr. Patrick. I mean, I've seen a lot. Guys, when you Google Dr. Patrick Treacy, you'll see a lot of information of how much recognition awards he's received. But anyways, the science behind the technology of the process you mentioned sounds very futuristic and in a way beautifully simple, I must say, using the body to actually heal itself. Now, you've trained over 10,000 doctors and nurses, Dr. Patrick. What drives this passion for teaching, and how do you see it impacting the future of aesthetic medicine?
That's a very good question. If we become aware of the fact that we're on Earth for a limited period, and particularly I'm aware of that because there was not at one but two funerals today, my mother's best friend and my own auntie, and you realize if you've got a limited time, what are you going to do with it? I think a lot of doctors tend to want to achieve things materialistically and accumulate a yacht or a nice house or a nice car or something, whereas actually that'll never be part of a legacy. People will respect you. I think if you leave them something to remember, be it that you helped them when they were stuck. And I, before did this interview today, dealt with two doctors, one in England and the other in, I think it was Romania. I can't remember now. It might have been Greece, that had both problems. And when patients and their doctors can approach you and don't feel fearful, particularly, it's a very lonely place to be if you've created a problem with a patient and nobody
Right.
wants to help you. And I was quite surprised by a lot of my colleagues that would back out of helping other doctors and say, oh, my solicitors or don't want me to do this, get involved. So I think there's more joy. And I do a lot of humanitarian work, as you probably know, through
Yeah.
Africa, throughout the world, in giving than receiving. To an extent, I know it's an old adage, but it's very true from the point of view that there is no sort of a give back. I've been lucky in
Yeah.
life with, things that I've had and all the rest. And a lot of the conferences, you end up with workshops teaching doctors. So you could be teaching 10 in a session, or you could be teaching 200 in a session. I'm thankful from the point of view that a lot of people, I suppose, appreciate the fact that you give them your information. And I've always tended to do that in terms of books or whatever. So a lot of my, I suppose, secrets are in my books.
I see. Well, that's exciting. And it's inspiring to see that kind of dedication of yours, Dr. Patrick, to, raising standards and empowering practitioners worldwide as well. But balancing all this are pretty hectic, running a successful clinic, conducting research, writing books, and teaching must take some serious juggling skills. I can't imagine your calendar. So, how do you manage this all?
It can be a bit hectic at times, there's no doubt about it. And I suppose there's one or two secrets. If you're going to get a conference to fly you somewhere, make sure it's business flights, because you may be arriving somewhere at 6 o'clock in the morning and giving a talk at 9. So, I mean, you need to get your sleep. In terms of exercising that, I'm not a great person for the gym, I must admit, but I'm sure if other doctors were doing things with a hectic life, you should maintain that as well. A lot of it, I suppose, is having a work schedule that you can sort of plot ahead. And I have staff that sort of, are very good, that can look after me as well. Marie, my clinical director, often can take over and handle things in my absence in terms of plotting where I should be and all the rest. And my other doctors are good because I can often leave and I know that I can trust my doctors and nurses to get in contact with me if they ever have a problem, which they don't tend to have, because most of them think with my mindset. So they tend to do the sort of things I do. And as a consequence, we don't really run into many problems that are complications. And if we do, we probably can sort them out as we do for other people.
Yeah. Well, you've got that balancing act down to an art, Dr. Patrick, I must say. I mean, and there's also a wonderful team behind you of doctors and nurses, as you mentioned. That's great. So lastly, looking into the future, before I let you go, what excites you most about the future of aesthetic medicine, Dr. Patrick, and how do you see your role in shaping its next chapter?
This is one of the aspects of medicine that will shape the future of medicine. And I really mean that. The first thing is we look at the bioregenerative methods now. We're using them probably in cancer in terms of blocking receptors and all the rest, with the new vaccines towards malignant melanoma, breast cancer, and glioblastomas. But nobody except aesthetic medicine is really looking at it the other way around, and that is how we can induce longevity into patients' lives. And I don't necessarily mean anti-aging medicine. If we look at even what we're doing, when I'm going down to Sicily very soon, we're going to a farm with some cattle where they're going to get colostrum to make not only exosomes, but those secretomes. And these can now be taken orally. And if theory comes into practice, they will be able to use these to make people probably not only have their hair living longer, the skin, but probably the people themselves also living longer.
Yeah.
So this is one of the big things going forward that we're going to have. And there was a second thing, but it's just escaped my head at the moment what I was going to sort of mention.
Well, so reversing age, or at least the looks, and from the inside. But
Oh,
that's
yes, I remember the second one now. BTL have brought out a device that will sort of change your behavior on your brain. And you put it over your head. It's called the Exomind. And as a
okay.
consequence, for the first time, we're going to have the application of modifying neurological behavior taken from psychiatrists and moving into aesthetic clinics, which is going to be an interesting one. So you're going to have a situation where it's going to reprogram brains theoretically. I don't know yet whether it's suitable for depression, but I think it certainly is for mood elevation. And it can be used as well for those things like addictions and that. I think we're going to get a device very soon. I don't want to say too much because I'm saying the wrong thing. But we know, for instance, with a lot of the new injections like Ozempic, that will stop people drinking alcohol, will stop people smoking, it'll stop sort of cocaine addiction. So now we're looking at a lot of these neurological pathways in a totally different way. I know psychiatrists did for years, and they sort of applied some devices, some of them like ECT, that we look back in with horror, I suppose, to an extent. And some of the newer devices that BTL are doing are actually being taken from psychiatry, where they sort of have been used successfully. But a lot of the new drugs and pathways in terms of behavior modification may, believe it or not, fall into the aesthetic clinics. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. But the question is, how do you see the future going? So that's going to be one thing. Longevity, and a lot of the clinics may be actually doing IV exosomes. And I suppose the second thing is brain modification and thought modification.
Wow. Sounds incredible. I hope we can touch on that next time, Dr. Patrick, because that sounds like a groundbreaking way to save lives.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this has been really enlightening. It's no wonder your work continues to set such high standards and inspire thousands. Thank you so much for gracing our show and letting our community hear your thoughts and stories. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, Dr. Patrick, and I hope to have you back soon.
Okay, well, thanks, Miles. That's lovely.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. For our viewers who want to learn more or perhaps book a consultation, reach out to Dr. Patrick at drpatricktreacy.ie. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. Whether you're watching or listening to our podcast, I hope you tune in again next time for more insights from leaders who are changing the game in their industries. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused and inspired with X-Rays.